Okay, the ECB has announced job losses. 62 jobs will be cut. That is a concern. Questions have to be asked about the financial management of the ECB. Where's all the TV money gone over the last 15 years from Sky? And question marks have to be asked about the longevity of this TV deal and how it's actually not necessarily benefiting the sport because fans aren't switching off. You look at the World Cup final last year and the viewing figures, and you look at the peak viewing figures in 2005, and there's a 10 million gap loss. So yes, loads of people got interested in the World Cup final last year, but that's still 10 million viewers less than in 2005 at peak viewership, which I believe was the Trent Bridge test, where we had nearly 27 million people in this country at some point watch part of that test match, or all of that test match. I believe I watched all that test match because I was on my school holidays. But in 15 years, we have lost 10 million TV viewers from peak viewership. The ECB is in financial crisis, and jobs are being axed from the governing body, which is a concern. The 100 format they have put a huge investment into, and they're not guaranteed to make a profit for the first 2 years. In fact, what the ECB have said is they're going to make a loss in the first year, which is concerning, and they may break even in the second year, which is concerning. The fact they've had to delay that by a year is more concerning because they're not getting any revenues in from the 100 at all. Their social media advertising campaign really didn't get the results I didn't think the ECB wanted. There was a lot of negativity aimed at the ECB going, we don't want this. And yes, they're trying to attract new fans to the sport, but if you're losing your existing fan base, there's an issue. So there's a disconnect between the fans and the sport. The county game is in crisis well before this COVID pandemic. And the only people to seem to have benefited from the last 15 years and all this TV money from Sky is the players on centralised contracts and members of the ECB, so employees of the ECB. That's the only beneficiaries I can personally see out of the last 15 years as a cricket fan who has been becoming more and more disillusioned with the sport and the lack of accessibility of the sport. And I have viewers asking me, why don't I cover cricket more? Because it's not accessible. I'm not paying Sky money for a product that A is inferior to what it was in 2005. I think the quality level of player is less. The quality of test matches is nowhere near as good, and T20s and one days. I think the quality of cricket is less, and the fact that the ECB has, and Cricket Australia have overdone the England-Australia rivalry in the Ashes and the various one days and T20 series. It's almost like a yearly thing now. They've really killed that. They've overexploited the rivalry between the two nations, and in reality, I think it's lost a little bit of its uniqueness and its luster. It's just they've oversold it. They flogged a horse to a donkey, basically. They've oversold the product, and people are getting bored of it. It's lost some of the magic, and that was one of the big selling points of cricket in the 2000s, the 90s, and the 80s. Was the length of time between Ashes series and the time to get revenge on each other was longer apart, and those Test matches meant more to the players. And now it's just we do it every other year, and it becomes a little bit of a head scratcher about why they've oversold that product. When you've got New Zealand, one of if not the best Test side right now, World Cup finalists. New Zealand, a nation that is so small in numbers but overachieves on a sporting level. We should have more Test matches against New Zealand, more one days and T20s against New Zealand. They have some of the best cricketers right now in all forms of their game. Emerging nations like Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Ireland, that would be more beneficial for the sport, surely. Exposing new players to a global audience. Nope, not interested. The fact we got the Test series against Pakistan and the West Indies ahead, that's great. But the West Indies only getting 2 Test matches? That is kind of insulting to the West Indies, quite frankly. And yes, these questions aren't going away. The ECB is going to have to massive structural changes are going to have to happen. And one of the only ways the ECB can financially survive going forward is the top-end talent on the centralised contracts are going to have to get paid less. They're going to have to pay the top-end talent less in order for the sport to be more sustainable. And this has been spoken about across the sporting spectrum, across the globe, is top-end talent might have to get less pay in order for those at the bottom playing professionally to get paid a bit more and the game to become more financially viable going forwards. We'll have to see what happens with the 100 next year, but it's going to be a loss maker. And if the ECB continues to make losses, that is not going to be a sustainable format for them to keep pushing down fans' throats that we just don't want. If the ECB had listened to the fan base, we wouldn't have the 100. If the ECB had kept shared rights on TV between Sky and free-to-air channels, be it Channel 4, Channel 5, the BBC, ITV, whoever it was, fans would have stayed tuned in. We wouldn't have to have the 100 format. We wouldn't have to have the concern to do with the county game and dwindling crowd numbers before the pandemic. Questions have to be asked about some of the decision making at the ECB and where the money has gone. Because yes, they've made massive losses, and that is a worrying thing. But if they'd actually been a bit more financially prudent, they could have mitigated some of those financial losses by having reserves of cash, which is something they clearly don't have. Because if they'd been more financially prudent with their money and the TV deal and all the TV money, there'll be a rainy day fund which they could have propped up, covered some of the losses this year, and we wouldn't have to have a format that no one wants called the 100. So there we go. So questions have to be asked of the ECB's management of their finances and where the money goes and who gets paid what. Because the reality is people are losing their jobs and the losses are going to continue next year. Massive structural changes have to happen at the ECB. Massive. They have to look at where the money goes. And the TV deal has to be questioned. But I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much for watching. Place your thoughts below, and I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.